Greetings, Christine. Here is your final critique for Art 828 Creative Photography. My first initial impressions, I think you did a good job of actually mixing the black and white and the color and the desaturated imagery. The compositions look strong, interesting, compelling. Obviously, the subject matter is interesting and compelling as well. And we just need to start looking into the finer points of your photographs. So let's start here at this image. Really nice composed image of the yucca. I like the foreground. You have the nice strong vertical lines in the foreground. Then you have that classic landscape mountains as a backdrop for those things, and it works very well. Feels like a very traditional modernist landscape photograph, which I love. This image, I think, works well too. This has a much more modern feel simply because probably of the color aspects to it. But I like how you use this subtle shift of depth of field. A traditional landscape photograph would have this sharp as well as all this stuff sharp. But I like how you have this sharp, and then we have this slightly out of focus, and it seems to help emphasize this because this information here is not nearly as dramatic as a mountain. But you do a good job of using your focus and your depth of field to maintain the emphasis here, and use this as really nice supporting visual elements to your image. And I think in the end it works well. It works very well as a finished photograph. I was just looking at XIF, EXIF data down here. Your shutter speed. Your aperture is 1/2500ths of a second. That to me tells me that your ISO is only at 400. Just I guess your aperture is at 6.3, so that really opens it up. Usually when I'm a landscape photographer, I'm using the smallest aperture I can, so my shutter speeds often get, if I get a 60th, I feel like, wow, a lot of times it's the 30th or less. So I just find that surprising. But I thought maybe your ISO was turned up really high. But no, you're only at 400, and that's fine. A high ISO can actually decrease your image quality. So that's something I try to avoid unless I'm, one, I just need the image in its lower light situation, or two, I like the aesthetic that having that higher ISO can give. This is a really nicely composed image as well of the flowering of the yucca and the horizon line, and then the repetition of this flower here, an older flower here, and I get another line here. There's a nice movement. This is actually a really important element, this little line sticking up here. It helps us create the flow. If I take that away, it's just these two things, but that just kind of eases me back down into this texture and this information, and then back up here, and then I like the gradation that you have in the sky. And it's another beautiful, very sort of modernist feeling landscape photograph. As is this. I really like how you break up the horizon. However, one thing is, I really like that photograph. I don't know that I would put these two next to each other like that. I would break them up a little bit. I might, stick this image here, and then maybe that image, and then go to that image, and then that image, something like that. Break them up a little bit more, or I might integrate actually. We have this color, all this block of color, and the block, and I don't know, maybe experiment with just presentation, just mixing up the color and the black and white together a little bit more. Let's just jump back into this image. Again, this is another nice composition, another nice detail. This actually might be one of my favorite photographs. Keep going back to it. And there's good line quality and good movement in here. It doesn't hold as much for me as the other one. I really like this image though. Okay, great. Another nice strong landscape photograph. I really like the darkness around here and how it offsets this one single shoot of that yucca, dead flower. Because if this wasn't dark back here, it would just get lost and it would just feel like a mushy mess. But you did a really good job of juxtaposing that against that darkness. And then, I even like this form here too. I'm glad that the composition doesn't end here. kind of keeps pushing me back here, and then there's all this diagonal movement, and a sort of interesting use of a somewhat narrow depth of field. All this is sharp here, and this is just a little bit soft, and I think that works really well. And I also, of course, really like this photograph. I love the movement of the stone. I just love being out west and photographing. So much the geography, the geology. It just is so photogenic. Sometimes I feel like it just comes so easy. It's not easy, but it just comes so much easier, it seems, when I get out further west. I would actually maybe be pushing this a little bit more. I would get this image a little bit darker and then push the contrast up a little bit. And I could really emphasize these nice waves and this rock. And I want to leave the sky alone, though. I like how you have the sky right there, just that nice soft gradation from the light gray to a light gray to a light gray. Here, though, I want to get a little more richness in value and darkness and pull out those waves and add a little more contrast. And to do that, we'd have to get into some more local editing and local selections and feathering, all of that sort of stuff in Photoshop with GIMP. This is a nice, soft, subtle use of color. And as you talked about here, you talked a little bit about the new landscape photography. I think this image totally fits that, and that is actually really nice. I love the subtle changes of color and the texture in this rock. And I like the light and the shadow and the light and the shadow over here. And I really like that we just see this little bit of human, incursion into such a beautiful landscape photograph. I think that actually really makes this photograph so much more interesting for me than just a pretty rock. And I love pretty rocks. It's subtle, it's soft, but it adds a whole new dimension. And this image, you could even try and publish this image on that new photograph, new landscape photography forum. Talk to the, join that forum, and you can see if the fellow there, Cummers fellow, will post your image. I think you can just post your images up there too. I'm completely figured out how it works. Mostly I'm a passive viewer on that. I've had one conversation with the Cummers fellow. But all right, anyways. Yes, the Joshua trees and these lone things. I love the desert for its ability to isolate objects. You are able to isolate this, probably a part of the yucca or the Joshua tree, which is just an overgrown lily, right? That branch, and it's just here in that shadow. It's such a dynamic shadow, and it dominates this image. But you also have all this nice information: Joshua trees here, the mountains, blue sky. It's a nice push-pull between all these elements in the photograph. I even like this line that crawls across there. But I love that desert for the ability to isolate things, which can be more difficult in really heavily treed forest areas. And I always am fascinated by the desert. Everything is bare and open and honest. I love it when I find those Joshua trees, like a dead one, and you just see these. It's like the things just fell apart and the trees just kind of laying dead on the ground, and it's just there forever, because there's not moisture to make it rot like there would be in a forest or a rainforest. I'm a little less engaged with this composition. There's something interesting about it, but it doesn't have quite that. You talked about you like composing without the horizon line. It offers you more freedom, and yeah, you're right. And this feels more like an abstract expressionist painting. You can turn it any way. I would maybe boost the saturation of the colors or something like that. But I like how that horizon line, and particularly when you're able to introduce those little elements of humanity, how they create different connections. And they create this sense of space where I have to travel through that space, and that traveling allows me to think. This feels very flat to me. And all these abandoned structures. That's, just nice, lovely textures. I don't think you've desaturated this. Kind of feels that way a little bit, but it's just that bleaching of that desert sun, I would assume. But, I like the sky. I like the geometry that you also present me here with this line, this triangular form, this pseudo-triangular form up here. And we have these rectangles, feels triangles. And we have these organic sort of holes and a little bit of grass and this mountain range. And this lovely shadow here too. Oh, such a nice hard shadow, but still soft with nice details in the shadow and details in the sun area highlights. So that's really nice composition. Okay, this is probably one of my favorite compositions. So, okay, you got a lot of good compositions. It's all right, Christine. Yeah, I like the juxtaposition of the telephone poles and the tree here. And this, I think, is also another sort of iconic new landscape photography image. It's funny, this new landscape photography phenomenon I see on Facebook, that group, I'm trying to figure out if they're anything different or anything more than the new topographics of the 1970s that Robert Adams was a part of, Frank Golke was a part of. I'm trying to determine if they're like pushing more, if they're just kind of building off that and just a more contemporary view, or if there's like a different aesthetic to it at all, and I haven't quite got a sense of that yet. This image I like, and seems more of a supportive image. To me, it's not as connecting of an image where I start thinking about lots of different ideas like I do in some of the other photographs. Feels flatter. Excuse me. Now this image, on the other hand, I really do appreciate. I really like the vertical lines that lead me up here in these speculative trees. It simultaneously has a flatness and a depth that intrigues me and engages me. It almost looks like it'd be flat, like this is a tree trunk and a tree top, but I do see the actual physical space of this moving back and this stuff being off in the distance. And I like how that space flip-flops for a fairly wide-angle image. And I think the grayscale, I'd be curious to see it in color, but I really do like it as it sits in grayscale. Yeah, see, I really love this image too. I love how these trees are leaning out over here. I mean, the straightness of these poles. And I can't determine if I like this image better or the other one with that one tree and the poles. I really like how the organic is, more fluid and flowing and diagonal, and then this rigidity of this man-created sort of structures. This has a nice contrast to that. And it's funny, this falls so much in the center, but all of this diagonal really kind of just keeps your eye moving. So many diagonal lines, including that vanishing point, and then of course the telephone poles, and a nice color and the nice light coming in strongly from this side here. Really wonderfully composed photograph. And I look at these and I really enjoy them. This one is more that odd subject in here, but nice light. This has an even more contemporary feel. Like some of these are just pretty landscapes. And this is the question I get when I'm looking at this work, and a question in general I have even for myself as I go about. Sometimes it's just so easy in this digital age you got a good sense of composition, you can create a good photograph. You get a good sense of composition, good material. How can you not come away with a good photograph? The question then becomes, that's a lot of people have a good sense of composition, and there's a lot of beautiful stuff and interesting stuff to photograph. How do you separate yourself? How does one separate themselves and push them? And I think it has to be with their ideas and how they're connecting it. And I think it's so important. By the way, I'm talking now, philosophical and grand scale sort of things. This is a beautiful photograph. I love the light. I love the angles, the diagonals. I love the juxtaposition of the natural on the wall, and then these, the falling apart building, but then also this newer, intact infrastructure. But the question becomes, how do we contextualize these things? How do we make them rise above? I think my answer is everything has to be perfect. not just visually, not just technically, but also conceptually. You've got to really have something that's different or pushes new ideas and new things. This is one of my issues I have with that whole new landscape photography thing is I can't determine if they're doing something new, if they're just building off something old. And I think there's definitely a lot of new things to play with in this day and age, and new ideas and new problems that we need to address and look at. What are those new problems? Love this photograph. Such a nice sense of composition, But I'm left here like, this is not my first critique today, and I see a lot of nice photographs. Not everyone can make it in this world and command new things in this world. So, all right. This is the last image in this image. Another nice photograph. So, in the end, good job, Kristy. Enjoyed looking at your work. Hopefully you got something out of the class, and if you have any questions, let me know.